Okay. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everyone to Georgia Audubon's monthly meeting. I'm so glad that you are all here with us. My name is Karina Newsom. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Georgia Audubon. And we are so excited to have a really special guest today for our monthly meeting. But before we introduce her and jump into that, I've got a few quick announcements. Number one, coming up on Tuesday, March 30th, we've got the Birding by Ear webinar with Georgianne Schmalz, from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then we've got on Wednesday, the 31st, a What's That Bird spring workshop webinar from 7 to 8:30 p.m. So I hope you'll join us for those two. Those are both coming up this week. And then on April 22nd, as part of the 3 billion exhibit that highlights the loss of birds that have occurred in North America, we will be hosting a webinar entitled Liberation and Hope Through Black Art. And this will be a webinar featuring Dr. J. Drew Lanham, Rashina Fountain, Isaiah Scott, and Timothy Joe. And it's going to be a dynamic, awesome panel discussion along with poetry reading, talking about visual art, prose, the written word, all of it. So we hope you'll join us again. That's on April 22nd, which is a Thursday at 7 p.m. We also have, as Dottie just put into the chat, we have closed captioning, which is available for this webinar. So if you scroll over to the CC button on the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to enable closed captions for this webinar event. And then our final announcement is that Georgia Bird Fest is right around the corner, and it's going to be taking place for about a month long, from April 17th to May 16th, 2021. And so you can feel free to look on our website, register for the awesome events that we have going on, which are going to be a combination of virtual and in-person field trips. So we hope to see you all there. So before we jump in and get started, I just want to let you know that you can ask questions in the Q&A function, and we will answer them. We'll have Deja answer them at the end of the presentation. We'll have a few minutes for a Q&A. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, our guest of the hour. Deja Perkins is a colleague and friend of mine. She is an urban ecologist and ornithologist who recently graduated from North Carolina State University's Fishery and Wildlife Conservation Biology Master of Science program. So definitely congratulate her on that. That is a massive achievement. She is originally from Chicago, and as such has seen firsthand how access to nature and exposure to wildlife and environmental programs can differ depending on what part of the city that you're in, especially in minority neighborhoods. She believes, and it's true, that by exposing people, especially Black youth and young adults, to the natural sciences and the wonders of the outdoors, that they'll be encouraged to pursue natural science careers, enjoy outdoor activities, and become stewards of the environment. She's especially interested in the intersection of environmental justice and conservation, looking deeper at how environmental and social justice issues impact wildlife and how people value the environment. Deja is president of the Black AF and STEM Collective. She's one of the co-founders of Black Birders Week, which this year is happening again for round 2. From May 30th to June 5th. So definitely feel free. I encourage you to tune in for this online activism event that'll be happening all week, again, from May 30th to June 5th of this year. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Deja Perkins.
Thank you, Karina, for that awesome introduction. And thank you so much, Georgia Audubon, for having me here today. I also want to give a shout out to Karina, who also just defended and successfully defended. So congratulations to you. Yes, I love it that we're having more Black scientists, Black women in this field. And with that, I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. So today I'm going to be talking to you all about equity in birding. Does where we go birding matter? And so a lot of the information that I'm presenting to you all is what I've been studying for the past, almost 3 years now. And the research that I've conducted with my master's advisor, Dr. Madhusudan Kati. So like it was mentioned earlier, my name is Deja Perkins. I am an urban ecologist, an ornithologist, and most importantly, I am young, gifted, and wild about birds. I work with birds large and small. My favorite are raptors. And I'm just one of the many people who are out here doing some amazing work. And I love to go birding because I think that it brings us together. You can see birds no matter where you are. And because of that, I am really passionate about getting people to notice the birds and the wildlife in their neighborhoods. And so because of that, I lead bird walks in collaboration with the city and my community, just really getting people to understand more about the wildlife that live in their neighborhoods, exposing youth to the outdoors and to birds, and getting people excited about the different wildlife that we have in our neighborhoods. And before I really get into the meat of this presentation, I really want to know a little bit more about you all at here at Georgia Audubon. So I want to know, how exactly do you go birding? Are you a backyard birder? Are you a rare bird chaser? Are you an eBird lister? Do you use eBird? Do you explore those hotspots? Do you keep track of your lists? And do you observe birds during your daily activity? So go ahead and click on the answer for that poll. I think there it goes. And let us know how you go birding. And I wanted this to be multiple choice because I know there isn't the one answer for how we go birding. And I'm curious because a lot of people that I talk to say that they're not, they're like, oh, I'm not a birder. And I want people to really expand their idea of what exactly a birder is. And I really want to get to know a little bit more about you all and how you all go birding. I know for me, myself, I am definitely a backyard birder. I'm an eBird lister. Not all the time, but sometimes. I'd say probably about 80% of the time I'm an eBird lister, but most often than not, I am one of those birders who just observes during my daily activities, which means that I don't really share. Sometimes I don't share my eBird observations. Sometimes I'm just birding by ear while I'm walking my dog, or, as I go to the laundromat and I'm looking up, and it's like, oh, there's, I always have a pair of binoculars in my car. And it's like, oh, there is a osprey nest there, so it's always going around and looking at the various things in our life. So Karina, if you could go ahead and share those results for us. All right. Awesome. So we have about 81% of you all who are birders, and we have 16% who are rare bird chasers, 55, about half of you all are eBird listers, and the majority of you all also observe during your daily activities, which is great to know, especially for the remainder of this presentation. But it really looks like the majority of you all are backyard birders, which is great to know. And so one of the reasons why I got into this research and why I really wanted to study urban ecology is because while I was studying at various universities at Mississippi State, Tuskegee, and even North Carolina State University, I felt like a lot of the professors were equating cities to being bad spaces, and that, there's only negative things for wildlife from cities. There's, pollution and, fragmentation and environmental degradation and all of these horrible things, that we do to wildlife from cities. And for myself, growing up in such a big area in Chicago, I knew that wildlife existed in cities. I had traveled all over the states to different cities, and so I knew wildlife existed. And I couldn't understand why we weren't putting so much emphasis, why we were acting like birds and other wildlife don't exist in cities. It's really important that we actually conserve these places because cities serve as an important ecosystems and conservation, because birds and other wildlife don't only exclusively exist within green spaces within cities and urban areas, but they do use those spaces primarily. So there are so many variety of wildlife that we can see in our green spaces. And I'm pretty sure you all can see a lot of these same species down there in Georgia. And so because of this, I really wanted to start rethinking the way that we look at nature and the environment, and thinking about how we actually study wildlife. And so some of the things that I learned is that there are these different drivers that impact where populations are and if they are able to survive. And so there are things like extreme events. So we have hurricanes, sea level rise. Those things are huge natural events that shape the landscape. But then we also have these regional climate and biogeographical factors, which excludes wildlife into certain areas, these ranges that they can survive in. And of course, then we have the species life history and how they interact with other species, which really influences where they can live. But then we have things like human drivers. So we have things like urban form and structure. We have human networks. We have fragmentation, park structure, plant structure, like what we plant in the ground, building materials, our social network, and the culture and the movement of people that we have within our cities. All of these things really impact where wildlife can live. And one of the recent papers that came out that I love because it explains all of this in this really simple and easy to understand graphic, right? And so there are these social drivers on the natural environment. So we all have these systemic biases that we have, and they impact the ecological and evolutionary patterns and processes. And what I found during my, this is just casual observation. Now there was no in-depth analysis on my part, but just from my lived experience, what I was seeing was that we were only studying and asking questions and learning about this top layer right here. We were, as I was going through my academic journey, I was really only learning about the ecological and evolutionary patterns and processes. We touched on, disease dynamics, resource distribution, and even talked a little bit about urban heat island, but we never really looked into in depth how all of these things really can impact the ecological and evolutionary patterns and processes. But what we really didn't do was look at this bottom layer here. And so we all have these systemic biases that we have based on the way we were raised, our culture, which feeds into the way that we look into the world. So it feeds into the structural racism and classism. So things like residential segregation, immigration policy, law enforcement, resource allocation, political representation, gentrification, like all of these things impact where we see impervious surface cover. So what communities are exposed more to, more concrete and gray space than green space, which impacts where we see urban heat island effects within these pockets of higher heat within the city, because there's more impervious surface. And then we look at patterns of green space and tree cover. Well, where there's more green space, there's lower heat. That's kind of like that inverse relationship. And so a lot of those minority communities, they'll have higher urban heat island effect, less green space, less tree cover, which also means that your environmental pollutants, you have more trees, they can take in a lot of those air pollutants, they can uptake water, so things like flooding, all these other things that are affecting communities because they don't have, tree cover and green space. All these things are affecting these communities because they don't have this. It's all building up. So it also impacts the resource distribution. Where are resources distributed? How does disease flow? Like all of these things impact this ecological and evolutionary patterns and processes. And the thing I love about this paper is that it was really getting to these hidden social drivers that we don't really study, and we don't look at how that impacts the rest of these topics that we often study and conduct research on. And so one of the things that I challenge people to do is really rethinking our view of the global ecosystem, right? And so I am drawing upon this graphic of the determinants of human health and well-being. So at the center of our all ecosystems, especially urban ecosystems, are people. We are the keystone species of urban environments. Every little thing that we do impacts the surrounding environment. So, you know, the way that we were raised, our lifestyle, what our work-life balance is like, how we live our lives, like how much time do we spend outside versus indoors? Do we value growing our own food and having gardens in our yards, or do we value having large lawn landscapes? What is our community like? So the community that we live in, is it, you know, very diverse, or is it not diverse? And how does that impact the way that our community is built? The local economy. So where do we see value of monetary investment? Are we investing in our local community? Are we investing in other communities? Is our community invested in? So what does that look like? Is our community made up of vacant lots and, you know, rundown buildings, or do we have tons of new buildings, and do we have a lot of redevelopment going on, or is our community kind of like unchanging? And then looking at our activities. So how do we spend our time? You know, are we spending our weekends outside? Are we valuing the natural spaces in our communities? Do we have natural spaces in our communities to engage in various activities? Are we valuing the environments on our political ballots and thinking about all of that in the built environment? What materials are we using to build our cities? Are we using permeable pavement and permeable building materials? Are we using green building materials? Are we doing green infrastructure? And so, like, what are the materials that we're using to build our environment? And is that having a lower impact on the natural environment? So all of these things really impact the built environment, then the natural environment. So thinking about what types of things we plant, right? Are we planting native plants? Are we planting all these invasives? Are we planting ornamentals? Are we planting things that are the wildlife that live in our neighborhoods, that utilize the same spaces that we use? Are they benefiting from the things that we're planting, or are we planting things only for our selfish, our benefits, or what we are aware of from our cultural perspectives? You know, because a lot of people aren't taught about, you know, the benefits of native versus non-natives, and how that could impact their environment. So all of these things really impact the global ecosystem, how much biodiversity we have in our neighborhoods, what, you know, if we're building this healthy ecosystem. And the funny thing about it is that all of these things that impact the global ecosystem and the wildlife that share our neighborhoods, this is also the very same things that are the determinants of health and well-being of humans. So what's good for us is good for wildlife, and what's good for wildlife is good for us. And so that's what I challenge people to start thinking about. Start thinking about how your daily activities and the things that you do really impact the grander global ecosystem, right? So we are at the center, but every action that we do really impacts not only ourselves. And so then we have these things called legacy effects. So we have, like I said, those natural drivers and those human drivers, but all of these things can really leave a lasting impact throughout history. So those natural drivers that we talked about will be things like the native biomes, climate and topography, the initial vegetation of the area, and also the pre-urbanization land use. Now, human drivers would be things like specific historical periods. So if we think about Jim Crow era, if we think about the colonial history of this country and how it was created, then we have shifts in neighborhood urban form. So thinking about how communities shift, even within a city. You know, we have migration of people from, you know, downtown, like urban areas, to more suburban, and shifts. And how does that change the way that the built physical environment? How does that change when we develop and build new and expand, like urban sprawl? How does all of that leave a lasting impact on the environment over time? We also have shifts in socioeconomic change, so income. So with that shift of people and where we're building and where we are settling, there's this shift in the income of the area, right? Depending on who lives there and how much money they're bringing in. But then we also have urban parks and civic beautification movements. So we think about like the oh my gosh, my history is fleeting me now, but the conservation corps that established a lot of the parks that we have today. And so these are all things that leave a lasting effect, and they're things from far, before our time that are still existing today. And one of the biggest lasting legacy effects that we have is redlining. And so redlining was a policy established by the Homeowners Loan Association in the 30s and 40s. And it was really a practice to prevent minority home ownership. And so they went around basically coloring in and blocking off these sections of where people were living and classifying them and telling people where to and where not to invest. And so basically these areas that are outlined in green, these are areas that were deemed good. These were predominantly white neighborhoods. And then you go down to blue, which means that that's like the second grade. Those are areas that were noted as declining, but still good to invest in. When we talk about investment, we talk about monetary investment. We talk about the ability to get loans from banks. We talk about, who can actually purchase a home and get a mortgage in that area. And so then we have those yellow areas, which are C areas, or the third grade. And those are areas that are, I believe it was at risk. And so those were neighborhoods that contain immigrant communities and things like that. But then we had the red neighborhoods, which were primarily Black and Brown communities, and they were closer to environmental hazards and environmental pollutants. And they were deemed as areas like do nots. These, red is, in our heads, we typically think of red as areas that we do not engage in, do not. It's kind of that automatic association between red and bad. So those were areas where Black people were either forced to live, or like those were the only places that we could obtain loans to go into. But those were also areas where people were not investing in. They weren't giving, the same amount of housing. And what we see today is that there is a lasting legacy effect. A study by Locke in 2020 that came out showing that areas that were redlined in the past have similar amounts of similar amounts of tree cover as they did back then when they were originally redlined. So that means that neighborhoods that were marked as A or green had higher tree cover amounts than areas that were marked as red. And I believe they had like 20% more tree cover. And this is also true. You can see it visually through these two aerial images that I have here. And so this was not actually a part of the study, but I think it's really interesting how you can see how aerial photos really allow us to see the stark differences. So I'm from Chicago. I'm very familiar with these two neighborhoods. The Woodlawn neighborhood is primarily Black. You can see that you can see more gray space than green space, right? Than green on this image on the left. And the image on the right, Hyde Park area, I actually grew up about maybe like 10 minutes from Hyde Park, but the street that you take to get to Hyde Park, you can see how the neighborhood changes as you get closer to Hyde Park. And you can see clearly by this aerial image that there's a ton more tree cover here in the image on the right. And like I said, it's predominantly white space. Hyde Park was somewhere that everybody wanted to live in because it really was like a park. It was close to Lake Michigan. There were parks, there were trees everywhere. It was beautiful. It was a place that people really wanted to live. And so this is just to give you an example to show you that it really does, nature really does differ in different parts of the city. And there are a few reasons for that. And one of the things is, those lasting legacy effects like redlining, but then we also have something called the biological luxury effect. And so the biological luxury effect is really something that it's this phenomenon that happens where we see that there are more native species and higher biodiversity in areas that are that have higher income. And there are a few reasons for that, right? So there is places with higher income, they have the potential for more disposable income, the potential for more time. So you have, money and time to do things like this image on the right, to plant more plants. Not saying that that image on the right is correct, because I'm pretty sure it's a lot of non-native plants or plants that are not beneficial to wildlife there, but it definitely provides some benefits and able to cultivate this space or this mini ecosystem in your home. Or surrounding your home. And the same thing, this is just another example when it comes to urban form and income. And so the way that we cultivate our backyard and our yard spaces can really create this matrix, this continuous habitat within the urban landscape for wildlife. So depending on how much disposable income we have, we can potentially, have money to create and cultivate spaces like this, have greater control over the amount of biodiversity that we get within our yards, in comparison to people at the other end of the spectrum with lower income. They typically don't have all that disposable income, and so you don't really have the opportunity. And because of that, you have less. It has been shown that that lower income areas have lower levels of biodiversity and fewer native species. And so because of all of that, I was really inspired to move to North Carolina to work with the Lab of Reconciliation Ecology on this triangle bird count project, this shirt that I am boasting very proudly today. And so one of our goals for this was to map and observe the diversity of birds across the triangle region. So this means Raleigh, Durham, Cary, Garner, and Chapel Hill of North Carolina. So across 5 cities, we wanted to not only map the diversity of birds, but we also wanted to engage the local community and get people excited about birding. And so this was a citizen science project, which really just means people-powered science. And so we wanted to engage the local community and get people outside and participating in IDing birds. And this is something that has gone on for so long. I mean, the Audubon Christmas bird count is the first and longest running citizen science project related to birds. We have been birding and observing birds for so long. It's like, why not take advantage of how many people are out here basically collecting data about birds? And that is exactly what eBird does. And so it's a multi-use platform depending on what your use for it is. And so we have people who use eBird. It was created to match the way that bird watchers go birding. So it allows us to submit checklists. We can explore local hotspots. We can keep track of these life lists. We can keep track of our yearly list, which is something that I do myself because I want to know how many birds I'm seeing every year, and it's so quick and easy to just have it on my phone. But on the flip side, as a researcher, I can also go in and access that data and look to see what birds are people seeing in what areas, and it's great. It really allows us to do a lot of different things. But to the flip side, one of the things that eBird does is that it uses hotspots and site selection. So it allows us to explore areas where other people are seeing high amounts of birds. And if you are the type of birder who wants to see as many species as possible during a year, this might be the fastest way to do it, right? To go online, to look and see what parks are in your area, who's having the highest number of species, and to just quickly go to that park and check it out and explore. It's a way to build a type of community. It's a way to allow people to quickly be able to find different birds. And there has been proof that eBird studies works well in parks and green spaces. But like we mentioned earlier, parks and green spaces are not the only places that birds and other wildlife exist. But we have seen that there are over 154 tangible science actions from eBird, and that includes research and monitoring of species, developing things for the IUCN Red List, conservation planning. It allows us to create laws and policy, and of course, understand more about different sites and manage habitat. So what is the problem? You know, it has all these amazing benefits. What is the problem with eBird, right? So the problem that I found is that it only gives us a partial picture of the landscape, especially when it comes to urban environments. And so this is one of the study sites for my master's project, which was in Tucson, Arizona. And this is looking at the eBird data from 2019, I believe it was 2019 in Tucson, Arizona. And so with this map that I created, you can see it's a few different things going on here. So the first thing I want to point out is that we have these varying shades of purple. And so the lighter the purple, the lower the median household income, the darker the purple, the higher the median household income. And then we also have these varying shades of blue dots and circle sizes. And so the lighter the blue and the smaller the circle, the lower the species richness. The larger the circle, the darker the blue, the higher the species richness. So now that we understand that, well, the first thing we can see just by looking at this map is that we have all these gaps. We have all these spaces where we don't really know what's going on. Are there no birds here? Probably that's not what's going on. You know, are we just not collecting data from here? That's the more likely answer. But if this is what we were using to, let's say, determine site selection and whether or not a location is good enough to grant funding for restoration of a park or something for bird, is it a vital space for birds? Well, we wouldn't pick a site over here in a lower income neighborhood because there's no data here, you know? So when we use eBird, sometimes we only get a partial picture. But when we use a more equitable method of collection, such as a systematic count, we can see that we get more points. We get a better accurate picture of what the landscape looks like, and especially within the urban context. And that's the biggest thing, because the systematic count, it allows us to gain greater spatial coverage, and have a better, more accurate picture of what is going on with the bird population in an urban landscape. So like you can see with this map, so many more points. We have a lot. The points are larger, they're darker, meaning that there are more spaces with higher species richness. And we're also seeing that it's not just kind of excluded to these darker purple places, but they're pretty much all over. And so what's the reason for, you know, some of these gaps and these blind spots that we're seeing? Well, one, participation in citizen science. So for what we see a lot of times is that, well, not what we see. Well, yes, what we see and what has been studied is that minorities often participate less than the majority, and that the affluent participate more than the less affluent. And there are several reasons for this. One, when it comes to nature-based citizen science projects, that means access to natural spaces, transportation to those spaces, and I'll say not only access to natural spaces, access to high quality natural spaces. Just every green space was not built equally, I'll say that. So access to high quality natural spaces, transportation to those spaces, knowledge of scientific programs and processes, as well as conflicts with day-to-day responsibilities. And so those are a lot of the barriers preventing minority communities from participating in citizen science. And I will say this as a person who is a part of the citizen science community and does a lot of work with citizen science, it feels as if it almost feels like an academic extracurricular activity. And I'm going to leave that on that, and we can kind of come back to that later. And another reason we might be seeing this pattern is because of who the participants are, right? So we have this study that was done in 2006 showing that bird watchers are primarily white. I'm sure this has been updated since then, but I haven't been able to find any more recent studies than this. But from this 2006 study by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, what we see is that in a short comparison, that we have about 24% of bird watchers are white, and 6% are African American, 8% are Hispanic, 7% are Asian, and 21% are other. And that's a huge difference, especially when we look at the number. We have, when it comes to 44,000 white birders versus almost 1,500 African American birders across the entire U.S. That means we're sprinkled kind of everywhere, and it's probably hard for those birders to find community. It's very likely that they might be the only in their local area. And we also see that based on the same, that most birders are 55 plus in age. We have a good split, male and female. It's, our women birders are taking over. But we still see that most bird watchers are older in age. And we also see that most bird watchers make 75,000 or more. And which means that I myself don't fit into any of these demographics. I don't make 75,000 or more. I make much less. I am I'm in that lower range, in the lowest age bracket, I think, for the age of bird watchers. I guess I am a woman, so I have that going for me. But I don't really fit the statistic of what a bird watcher is, or what most people think of when they think of a bird watcher. And another potential barrier is that birding can be expensive, right? So we have all this money that we need for equipment, binoculars. Had no idea how expensive they are. A good pair of binoculars can easily run you anywhere from I want to say 150 on the low end, but really to get a really good pair of binoculars, I'd say about 300. And then we have the price of scopes, or the price of ID books and guides. Then you have the time, if you want to actually go birding, there are hours, those peak hours, morning or evening. And you also need the time to be able to travel, being able to take off work to go if you are a rare, bird chaser, or even if you want to go to festivals. Thinking about, I've never experienced like the Cape May Birding Festival or the Rio Grande Festival. And those are places that I want to go, but it takes time off of work. It takes money for food, lodging, transportation costs. So all of those things add up. Bird watchers contribute a huge amount to the economy, to the wildlife and conservation economy, especially. But those are all things that can be a barrier to participation. And of course, exposure to outdoor exploration and activities, depending on what age you were exposed to bird watching, and just getting in, not even just bird watching, but getting outdoors in general, and finding joy and recreation in outdoor spaces. And so these are two of my siblings. So this is my brother and my sister, my youngest brother and sister. And the last time I went home, I took them bird watching with me, because when I'm not home, they mostly just watch TV or play games, or they're on their phone. But I took them outside with me. We went and explored a couple of the patches in their neighborhood. And by the time I had my one pair of binoculars, and by the time the end of the day, we finished up, they were fighting over this one pair of binoculars. And my brother Mason at the time was 4, and he wasn't really even, it's not like he's IDing birds, but he can still look through the binoculars and look at a bird and say, oh, that bird is, brown and orange. What color are its feet? Orange. What like how big is the bird? What shape is the bird? What does its bill look like? Like, where is the bird? There are different things that even at his age that he can be able to identify. And so it really just depends on when they were sparked, when that interest in the outdoors was sparked for them. And I really truly believe that if I hadn't taken them out, they wouldn't they would never be exposed to this. But I guess an update on this situation is that I went home recently, and for my brother's 5th birthday, he actually asked our parents for a bird, and so that's what he got. So it went from this one outdoor exploration trip to, really just have them tag along and learn about just really getting them outside. It wasn't even about learning. It's just like, let's get you out the house. And it turned into, hey, I'm going to ask Dad for binoculars for my birthday. And really, it ended up turning into, hey, I asked Dad for a bird. And so now he and his bird, Coco or Cosmo, are best of friends, and they sit together and they cuddle and they watch TV together. But it really depends on when you were exposed, and it really there. I think that a lot of people have. We all have these connections to nature. It just really depends on if it's nurtured. And so why is there this difference between what we're saying between eBird and the systematic counts? Well, for one thing, the systematic counts, it's a very different protocol. We lay a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid across the study site, and we randomly distribute points so that there's only one point within each box, within each box of the grid. And then we allow our participants to go and select from those predetermined sites where they would like to go sample. So there's still this element of choice, but it's much less there's much less choice in where people are allowed to go birding with a systematic count. And it's been proven that this works because the Breeding Bird Survey uses this same structure, which was established in 1965. But the difference is that the Breeding Bird Survey exclusively it avoids urban areas. And so we really want to know, because urban areas and cities are very important ecosystems, we want to know what the birds are looking like in urban areas, but there really weren't a lot of studies being done. There weren't a lot of protocols. And so the Tucson bird count is what established this protocol originally. And this was in 2001. They basically used the same method of the Breeding Bird Survey, laying the 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid, randomizing the points, and then allowing their volunteers to go survey. And so we use the same method for our surveys for my master's project, where I looked at 4 different cities: Tucson, Arizona, Fresno, California, Raleigh, and Durham in North Carolina. And so for our systematic surveys, we wanted to see if our volunteers could identify the 25 most common species in order to participate. These were 5-minute counts in Tucson and Fresno, 10-minute counts in Raleigh and Durham. And the biggest takeaway is that our observers can select only from a number of predetermined survey sites. And of course, they must survey 30 minutes before sunrise and 4 hours after sunrise. I guess another important point to mention is that these were, they weren't allowed to go more than 40 meters away from whatever the point was. They were only allowed to bird meters or yards, one of those measurements, but they were only allowed to go in a certain amount of distance. And then for eBird surveys, in order to make sure that those were comparable, we used the stationary protocol for our checklist and looked at checklists that were submitted between April and May of 2019 for Raleigh and Durham, and then checklists that were submitted April through May of 2015 for Tucson and Fresno. And the difference with eBird surveys, the main difference, is that observers can record data anywhere and at any time. And I'll actually tell you why that's important. So remember, we talked about hotspot and site selection, and even the way that I was taught to use eBird, which was to explore a site on the eBird online platform. Whatever place had the most birds, that's where you go to try and see what you would go see that day. And so it creates this sort of variety seeking. And what happens is that we're sampling the same locations over and over and over again, which doesn't really allow us to capture the entire spatial extent of an area. We're having repeated surveys in a single location. And this is really important because cities are different. The characteristics of cities, their demographic makeup, how much people make, what the percentage of people who are in poverty, the area of a city. So what makes a city is different across the US. You know, the US is so wide, and so it really, we need to be able to detect a lot of those underlying social and cultural drivers in order to be able to determine and able to determine what the landscape really looks like. And so I just wanted to kind of quickly point out that this was something that we were seeing not only in Tucson, which was a Western city, but also here in Raleigh, and which is a more forested city. And so we see the same thing in that there are these blind spots when we look at, when we just map wherever people are birding through eBird. We see the same thing in Durham. We have fewer blind spots in Durham, but we get more, but we still have the same issue in Fresno as well. And you can see that the amount of eBird observations submitted in each city is also very different. And this depends on what the local community like. What are the birders in Fresno like versus the birders in Raleigh or the birders in Tucson? You know, why are we, at least to ask these questions of why are we getting, you know, less people observing birds, and what do the birding communities look like, and how does that impact the data that we are collecting? And so, you know, the main takeaways that I want you to understand from this are: one, are systematic counts and eBird checklists equal in their spatial coverage? The answer is no. Are volunteer biases reflected in site selection of urban bird survey? Yes. And these are things that we can just very quickly see based on the maps, and just based on visualizing the point data. And because this is through a citizen science platform or people-powered science platform where people are submitting observations, there's the potential for this to be a problem in other data sets. So when we think about iNaturalist or Falling Fruit, or, you know, if we look at rain gauge data from projects like Coco Ross or all these other citizen science data sets, is there's the potential to be this problem, because if we're thinking about who is participating in these projects and where are they located, and so then it's like, where are we collecting data from? And so I have a strong feeling that we would see similar patterns in other data sets like iNaturalist and others. And what I thought was really interesting was that there was an article released last month that basically supported my research, but in the opposite way, right? So they found that during COVID, people were birding closer to home, and they weren't birding in their normal spots. And they were saying that this is problematic because they weren't getting data from, you know, those natural spaces that they usually get data from. But for me, I think that shows that there is a bigger problem. It's that it's not that you're undersampling the places that you normally get samples from. It's highlighting that, hey, there are all of these other places that you haven't been collecting data from, and that is a problem. And so now let's see if we can take a closer look at Georgia. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, but I quickly put together this map. Let's see if it works correctly. So I no longer have access to ArcMap, but one thing I do have access to is ArcGIS Online, and so I can easily download the data from eBird. I can create a map. I can look at the neighborhood redlining grades in Georgia. So like right now we're looking at Atlanta. I can input the, or I can upload the eBird locations. And these are, hopefully, if I did this correctly, these are the observations from March through June of 2019 in Georgia. And so we can just kind of look really quickly and see where are people going birding in Georgia. So if we kind of zoom in a little bit, whoops, that's a lot of bit, and just kind of scroll around. So first we'll start at this one that has some points. So if we look at this, this neighborhood has received a grade of D, hazardous. Areas often receive this grade because they are infiltrated with undesirable populations such as Jews, Asians, Mexicans, and Black families. They're more likely to be closed for industrial needs and have older housing. And what we learned based off the LOC 2020 study, they're probably have less green spaces and less tree cover as well. I won't say green space, they'll probably have less tree cover. So we can see that, and then we'll also see, actually, let me go ahead and switch these layers really quick. Oh, it won't let me do that. Okay, that's okay. So one of the great things about ARC Online is that it allows you to just really look at what data is being seen in the area, right? So we have this one point in this red marked area, or this D neighborhood. So they saw 4 observations. There was a great horned owl, American robin, and chimney swift. Now these were they all on the same day? Yes. They were all, so these were all reported by the same person. Incidental protocol. So we can also see we can see the name of the bird, common name, scientific name, how many they saw, the state, the county, their the date and time, the type of protocol. So whether it was incidental, travel, or stationary, and how long they were birding, and the number of observers. And so we can easily pull this information from a lot of places. So what I want to do is just kind of explore, I don't have a mouse, so it's a little bit different. So let's, I guess, just kind of go here. So this has 23. So we'll say 22 because one of these is probably this this yellow layer here, the C declining area. And so this person saw ruby-throated hummingbird, blue-gray gnatcatcher, blue-headed vireo, chimney swift, Cooper's hawk, dark-eyed junco, fish crow, white-eyed vireo. Look at all these birds, right? And so we know that birds exist in a lot of different neighborhoods, but there is the potential to see more in areas that are that were historically not marked in red. And so let's try and find, okay, so this green space here, oh, it's, never mind, that's on the cusp of green and blue, so we'll ignore that one. Let's see. I'm really surprised that these, well, I'm not surprised that a lot of these green spaces don't have points. And that's because I feel like you all's biggest place for birding is Piedmont Park, maybe, potentially. I don't know if that's my assumption. But we have 8, so 7 observations here. The red-eyed vireo, American crow, Cooper's hawk, eastern phoebe, eastern bluebird, northern cardinal, pileated woodpecker. And so this is just a really cool way to be able to explore. Let's see, I think I missed a few questions in the, okay. So if there are any places you all want me to explore really quickly, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but if there are any places you all want me to just take a look at, let me know, and we'll just kind of see. You can also type in address or place. I used to go to Little 5 Points a lot when I was in, so let's see, Cooper's hawk, incidental, song sparrow, song sparrow, American robin, northern cardinal. And like I said, there are a lot more observations. Typically, these are just the ones from March through June of 2019. And notice I didn't change anything about the protocol. You're seeing all types of protocols. So if we eliminated the incidental, let's say we were doing this in the same fashion as my master's project. So if we were looking at stationary protocols, I'm sure we'd have a lot less points because a lot of these points have been incidental that we've been seeing, or of the traveling protocol type.
Someone had put in the chat, Deja, they asked for southwest Atlanta around Cascade Road.
Okay, let's Cascade. Okay, southwest Atlanta. Hopefully that's. You give it a second because there's a lot of. It takes a while for the points to load because there are so many. Or maybe there just aren't any here, which maybe is weird if you are somebody who's been inputting eBird observations in this location. But I mean, this is still Cascade Avenue, and here's a point here. So rock pigeon, come on, computer. Chimney swift, European starling, house sparrow, right? But I mean, if you're thinking about it, if we're looking, we're just not seeing a lot of observation points. So that doesn't mean that people are not birding. It could mean that people are not birding in this location, but it doesn't necessarily mean that either. It means that people are not submitting eBird observations, which means that we are having, if we're looking, let's say we're looking in this area and trying to do research, we're having a very skewed view. We have almost no data from this area. So
we did have questions, Deja. If you wait just a second, we wrap up.
Yes.
Are you cool? Okay. So the first question we had said, can you tell us more about systemic/equitable count protocols? eBird data, parent bird diversity versus median income of those neighborhoods.
It went out just a little bit.
Sorry. Actually, we can hear your mic real quick. Zoom is such a trip. So the question is, can you tell us more about systemic/equitable count protocols, RE, eBird data, and apparent bird diversity versus median income of those neighborhoods, which kind of feeds into one of our previous conversations, Deja, that we've talked about the city of Atlanta.
Yeah, so I guess my main takeaway, even from my research, is that we need to think about a better method. So a better method for collecting data would be to have some type of systematic approach where we are, arranging things with a grid and blocks, assigning random points and then assigning people. I think that there could be a collaboration with eBird and the method protocol. If we have let's say we have separate projects that we host on the eBird site and we ask people to specifically upload points through eBird on those through that project. So I feel like there's a way to do it. I believe that's the method that they are taking for the North Carolina Bird Atlas for the next 5 years, where they will be having a specific protocol for a collection when it comes spatially, but they're allowing people to upload their observations to eBird for ease of uploading. So I think one of the main things that this research really shows is that there are gaps in data in urban areas, and we can flip that and use that depending on how we want to kind of look at this. It can be, those gaps, okay, those are the areas that we need to prioritize, which is what the Triangle Bird Count is going to do this year, trying to prioritize those areas that we didn't get data from. And then, or you can, say, these are areas that we can highlight for engagement if there is, an area to do that, which someone is currently doing. So there are different ways that we can kind of interpret this information for my project.
Awesome. We'll do one, maybe two more questions if we have a chance. So Andrew Dreeland said, "Hi Deja, fabulous talk. The Cornell Lab has relied on what you can call two strategies to address the biases that arise from community science. Number one, incentives like challenges or events like the Great Backyard Bird Count, et cetera, and investment like sustained outreach and engagement with communities to diversify the birding community, like they've done in Latin America." So his question is, from your research, what is the best balance in deploying these strategies to address the issues that you've documented?
Wow, that's a loaded question, right? So I think there are a few different things that we can do. And one, targeted engagement is definitely the top thing on the list, but I hear this so many times. I've heard it. I didn't say it originally. It's not my quote, but someone said, that we need to focus on fixing the problems in-house before we try and bring more of the diverse populations in. Because if there are problems within your organization that are preventing people from wanting to participate, or just working with you, then even if you do that targeted engagement, you're still not going to get participants. And here is an example of this, right? So my first bird walk that I ever went on, I was in Minnesota at a BioBlitz. I was doing an internship at Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. I think it was like a local Audubon chapter had came out to the BioBlitz. They were having a bird walk. I was super excited because I'd seen all these birds on the refuge. I was like, yes, I want to learn about birds. I was the only Black person there, only Black woman there, probably the youngest person there as well. And it was really intimidating. So we went on this walk, and the guide, he was like, all right, we've got this bird up in this tree. Mind you, this tree had tons of leaves on it. It was a tiny, probably warbler or something that my newbie eyes just could not pick up. And he was going so fast. And so he was, pointing things out, putting things on the scope. And of course, me, never, really been on a bird walk before, never really engaged with other birders before, being in a location that is not my home or around people that I am comfortable with, I was very shy. And so he had the scope out, it was on a bird. I was nervous to ask questions. I was at the back of the line, and by the time I got up even close to the scope, the bird was gone, and so there are all these barriers that it's not necessarily, may not necessarily be with your organization, but like if we look at this story, there are a few things wrong, right? The bird guide, he wasn't very attentive to his participants, or else he would have tried to at least assist me in getting my eyes on at least one bird, right? I got so frustrated with this walk that I left. I was like, I don't want to deal with these people or these birds. So I went, and there was actually another volunteer who was always very nurturing and caring. He took the time to point things out to me. And so I went and joined his mammal tracking class that he had for the BioBlitz. And I spent all day in the mud flats looking at raccoon tracks and learning how to ID the left from the right deer print. And that was more fun for me because he took time to show me versus me being frustrated because I couldn't get eyes on the little tiny 3-inch bird that everybody was oohing and ahhing about. And so just keeping in mind, if you're doing this and being intentional about your engagement, keep in mind that yes, people are different. They have different experiences. They come from different backgrounds. Put yourself in their shoes. Think about what might make them more comfortable on this walk. Think about, they've never seen a bird before. They're probably not going to be able to sight birds in their binoculars. So you want to really point out the larger birds, even if that's something that is more common to the rest of the group. It's okay to spend 5 to 10 minutes talking about a turkey vulture because, that's something cool that you can talk about that everybody can see. You just really have to gauge like who your audience is, making sure that you are making your audience or the people that you want onto your walks, making sure that they're comfortable there. So making sure that they have the resources. I didn't even have binoculars. Like I borrowed binoculars from the refuge. So, providing materials, helping them build communities, hiring people from those communities to lead those walks, even if it's, like a special guest bird guide. I have Chicago Audubon is going to be bringing me to Chicago to lead a bird walk because they're interested in engaging, a very niche community. They are, trying to build up programs so that they are, building these leaders who can then lead bird walks in their own. So they have this program where they're training high schoolers to be bird guides. And not just any high school, but they're training high schoolers in the communities that they want to target, with the diverse population that they want to target in their community. So they're taking them to the parks that are in there, that they want people to be engaged with. So it really, there are a few different things, but I feel like there are a lot of small things that we don't think about, and number one is having a space where people feel comfortable, where they feel included, and keep in mind that, when people are new and they come from different backgrounds, it's probably going to be nervous. They're not going to want to ask questions. And so it's about being intentional about engaging that person. So even if it's just walking up, oh, hey, you're new, making sure, did you get to see their eyes on the bird? Because sometimes they might just not say anything, because they don't want to be the only one. Like that can also be an outing experience, right? Oh, did everybody get eyes on the bird? I'm not going to raise my hand because I don't want to feel like the one dummy that didn't see the bird, or, so I try and use multiple tools in order to engage people. Yeah, so definitely figuring out who your audience is and catering to them primarily. And then providing resources is a huge thing, and just helping them to build their own communities, I think is super important.
Deja, I absolutely love that. You have shared such nuggets of gold regarding engagement, and it's so critical. I know we're over time, but this is important. When we are thinking about how do we get more people doing this community science or doing birding, enjoying the outdoors, oftentimes what I've noticed as a reflex is that folks are like Deja said, how do we get these people who have never been invited before, who the space is not built to cater to, into this space? And it's like, that's not going to be a successful effort, right? But to build leaders from those communities, to lead in those communities, as opposed to you trying to be the leader in those communities, makes a huge difference and is the most equitable. And so I just absolutely love what Deja said. And just so y'all know, when Deja's research, when she defended her research and she shared it with us, I had no idea about the redlining, right, and how it lines up with eBird data, but I was like, that makes perfect sense. And so we asked the GIS team at National Audubon, based on Deja's research, to run an analysis on the city of Atlanta using eBird data and median income. And what we found is, just like Deja's research said, and what she's seen in multiple other cities, is that in the city of Atlanta, eBird data, like checklists, the number of checklists, has a very tight relationship with median income. The places that have a higher median income have high eBird checklist data. There are more people submitting sightings. In places with lower median income, there are way fewer checklists, people submitting eBird sightings. And so it just really reflects, a gap in engagement in community science. And it's not because there's no green space. It's not because there's no birds. I've seen the birds myself, right? I've been out in these places myself. I live in these spaces. So Deja's research is absolutely revolutionary. Everyone needs to be paying attention to how social systems, especially ones that are oppressive in nature, are impacting not only people, right? People are at the root or at the center. But seeing how that has a ripple effect in how we do science, right? Which affects our ability to do science well and to do it as thoroughly as possible. So these have far-reaching implications, and we are just so grateful to Deja for sharing all this wisdom, for bringing to light a pattern that people have not been talking about, right? And so I'm so excited to see the work that Deja has done be spread everywhere, for people to respond to it in an equitable way, and for her to continue to lead this field in the right and equitable direction. So before we go, Deja, if you had any parting words, I wanted to leave space for you to do that before we close out.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for inviting me into your space today to share what I've been working on, what I hold so close and dear to my heart. And I just, it's not just about the birds, it's about the people. I mean, at the end of the day, birding brings us all together. It makes all of us happy, it makes us happy, it makes us smile. And I want to challenge you all to, explore the places, your local places. Put eBird away, if you are a backyard birder, venture out farther, than what you're normal, and just explore the different places that you have in your neighborhood. You never know, there probably isn't an eBird observation there. And even if it's, even if you're only seeing like 10 common species, you're helping with data for research, and you're learning about the communities around you as well. And if you don't feel comfortable, imagine how the people who aren't from your community feel when they come into your space. And so these are the things we have to start thinking about. But again, thank you all so much for inviting me into your space and listening to me today. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deja. You all have a wonderful rest of the day. We will save the chat. And if there are questions that you specifically wanted to get answered, that you wanted to make sure got answered, that didn't get answered today, or that you didn't have time to ask, I am putting my email in the chat right now, georgiaaudubon.org. And you can feel free to send those my way, and I'll interface with Deja to answer those questions if she's willing to do that, able to do that. But again, thank you all so much for coming, and we're excited to see birding be equitable moving into the future. Have a great weekend, you all. And thank you, Deja. Bye.